Hey there, environmental science. It's Mr. Johnson here. I'm excited for us to start our birding unit. It's one of my favorite units of the semester, and oftentimes, my students, it's their favorite one too. So hopefully, we can spark some enjoyment for you, and you can learn things along the way. The goal of this unit is to familiarize you with about 35 different birds that are pretty common to South Dakota. I've picked the ones that you're most likely to see. There are roughly 350 birds that call South Dakota home, and at some point I knew all of them, but it's been a while, so I'm a little rusty for some of the more obscure ones. But, you know, most of the time people see birds fly by and they just think, oh, it's a bird, and they don't really take time to look at the differences between them. So my hope is to sort of inspire some interest in the natural world around you through this birding unit, and you never know, it might become a lifelong hobby for you like it has been for me. So let's get started. With these videos, my plan is to go over 5 birds at a time. That way you can pick and choose which ones you rewatch for practice later on. A reminder that before watching these videos, you should be filling out the bird student note, whatever it's called, the identification notes. Remember to fill those out for your first impressions, because oftentimes that's all you get when you see a bird. When you look at it, yeah, you might get one chance to make a first impression before it flies away. And oftentimes that first impression is the most helpful in identifying the bird. So, sorry for the long intro. Let's get to it. Before we actually dive into the first 5 birds, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to show you sort of what things you might look for, to sort of train you. And I'll be using some of these terms. So, the things we want to look for is we want to look for any patterning where we can. We want to look for things like any sort of eye band that might be there. We want to look for maybe striping on the head. We technically call the head the crown, but I'll usually just kind of say on top of the head. So any sort of patterning on the face. We also might see eye rings or throat patches. Something to look for on the wings would be wing bars, obvious, lines across that wing. It could be 1 or 2 or none. There's also, sometimes we'll have coloration in the wing patch. Also, a few more terms that we'll be familiar with. Technically, the back of the neck is called the nape, but a lot of times I'll just call it the neck. There's the back and sort of the rump and the tail. And we can have different colors on all of these parts of the bird. The tail can be a hint as to the type of bird also, because we'll have tails of different lengths and different shapes and different patterns. Last but not least, we will talk about the breast and the belly of the bird. The breast is up higher, kind of the chest of the bird, and the belly is kind of the bottom part of that bird. So those are all things to pay attention to with identifying birds, because even if you don't know the one that you just saw, fly by, you might be able to notice certain patterns that stand out to you to look it up later on. The first bird we're going to learn today is the American robin. And the reason why we're starting with that American robin is it's the most common bird that people can recognize. Chances are pretty good that you've seen this bird and you can identify it as a robin. It has sort of a brownish gray back. It's kind of more brown than anything else. And it's got this pretty striking rusty red kind of orangish breast and belly. A few other finer details of this bird is it does have a yellow beak and a white eye ring to it. So that's our American robin. This is going to be one that's oftentimes used as a comparison to other birds. Like, well, I saw a bird that was about the same size as a robin, or a little bit smaller than a robin, or it had the breast that kind of looked like a robin, but it had a different back. Things like that. Also, this bird has a very common call that people are familiar with. It's sort of a laughing, happy sounding call. Let's move on to our second bird, the house finch. The house finch, if you look at it, it's one of a group of that people just kind of casually refer to as a little brown bird, because if it flies by and you don't get a good view of it, well, it just kind of looks like a little bird that's brown. This is quite a bit smaller than a robin. What we can see here is the back of the bird is brown, but it's not really any striking patterning. What we do see, the obvious red face. It looks like someone took a spray paint of, some red spray paint and kind of gave it a puff in the face. That extends down into the breast a little bit. And we do have some kind of light brown streaking on the belly of the bird as well. House finches tend to be in kind of smaller groups of their own kind. Sometimes it's a male and a female together. That red can vary in how bright it is and how much it takes over the face. But this is a pretty common songbird at bird feeders. The next bird we have is the house sparrow. That house sparrow, people will sometimes confuse the house sparrow and the house finch if they don't get a good view of it. But if we look at the house sparrow, we can see that there's more kind of chunky browns on the back. So there's more kind of obvious patterning on the back of the bird. The other thing we can see is that there's very obvious lack of coloration on the breast and the belly. So we don't have any of that striping. There's a little bit of white that comes up on the face, and we have a black bib. Now that bib sort of helps it find its ranking in the flock. These house sparrows are really, really common. I can almost guarantee that everybody listening to this video has seen a house sparrow. They fly in flocks of, up to, 15 or 20. There's quite a bit of them. And they're the ones where if you walk up to a pine tree or a bush and a whole bunch of birds suddenly fly out of it in a big flock and they're little and brown, it's probably the house sparrow here. And in those flocks, the size of the bib will determine the ranking order. So those with bigger bibs will get priority on things like food and whatnot. These house sparrows are also the ones that you will see sort of hopping around on the ground underneath your car or kind of perched up on your tire of your car. It's probably going to be the house sparrow. For our next bird, we are going to learn the black-capped chickadee. The black-capped chickadee is another bird that once people learn to identify it, you see and hear it often. The name comes from this obvious black cap that's on the head, but if you look at it, it's actually sort of like its head is an Oreo, where the black cap with a white cheek and a black throat. And this is a small bird, so if we were to rank the sizes of birds so far, that robin would be the biggest of the ones we've learned. The house sparrow and house finch are about the same size, but they are smaller than the robin. And the black-capped chickadees is just a little bit smaller than both of those. The other thing to look for is this bird will be more of a gray on its back. So we have a gray back, a black cap, white cheek, black chin. And sometimes people will look at this yellow underneath the wing of this picture, and they'll think that that's a really big color pattern of the bird. And really, this picture just happens to have more yellow there than most do. For the most part, you're going to see a little gray bird with a black cap and a black chin and a mostly white belly. This is going to be the black-capped chickadee. Also, this is one that you've probably heard without realizing it. It says its own name. It says chickadee. So if we listen to it, here's its call. And if you hear it, he's saying chickadee-dee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee. So that's a really common sound to hear, the black-capped chickadee. And the last one that we're going to do on this video is this little gray bird called the dark-eyed junco. This is what's called a snowbird because they tend to be around in the winter. So around this time, if you see a dark-eyed junco, it's probably on its way out pretty soon. Most often you'll find these underneath bird feeders. They don't often like to be up on bird feeders themselves, or in lower parts of trees or lower parts of bushes. If you look, it is just a gray bird. Just sort of most of it is more or less a flat gray color. It's got a white belly, so it looks like its belly was dipped in white paint, along with a light colored beak. And something you can't really see too well is that the outside feather on either side of the tail is bright white. And so when it flies, you'll see a flash of bright white on either side of the tail as it flies away. Also, this bird, when it's hopping around, it tends to fan that tail out. And so you can see that the white feathers on either side of the tail also. Again, this is the dark-eyed junco. It's going to be migrating out around this time. So keep an eye out, and maybe you'll see one before they leave. I'm going to stop this video, and I'll have the next 5 on the next video.